Hey there, I'm Mark from Spectrum Pulse, and today we finally have from Neko Case, Neon Gray, Midnight Green. It feels like both more and less time since we last heard from Neko Case. After her criminally underrated Hell On in 2018, one of the best albums of that year, she's been active with the New Pornographers on a couple good but largely overlooked albums, but I've been looking forward to that proper solo return, especially given so many other indie acts in the 2020s who have embraced challenging, witchy, country-adjacent, feminine rage vibes and aesthetic. Neko Case is the veteran in this territory, and in between proper production credits all given to her, alongside recruiting a 20-person orchestra to back her up, I was expecting a tour de force. Although probably a complicated one to untangle, because she's got no desire to make it easy. She's earned that. So now 7 years later, well, let's make this clear, the album is excellent. Neko Case is such an expressive singer and songwriter that she almost seems to make it look easy. But if Hell On had moments that tilted into the strange and uncanny while trying to balance out with more conventional hooks and song structure, this is bending into even more gnarled, twisting places, where the melodic hooks feel more incidental alongside these lushly orchestrated but increasingly abstracted songs, damn near prog rock in the composition, where you'd be inclined to say that there weren't many choruses at all until you realize how many turns of phrase and tunes manage to weave a place into your mind. It goes in the exact opposite direction of one of the main critiques I had with Hell On, that the arrangements could have afforded to have a little more gristly texture and bite. We'll come back to this. If anything, the strings and horns feel more grandiose and saturated, with Neko Case perfectly situated in the mix as the music churns and whirls, like how the reverb surrounds amidst the gleaming plucks and keys of the gorgeous Winchester Mansion of Sound before it breaks into a near vintage rock outro, or the wistfully surreal torch ballad of Louise, or the wiry piano-driven clicking of Little Gears until they slightly decompose through some gorgeous harmonies, similar to a more ragged, ticking country edges of Match Lit, which evokes such a stark contrast with the gorgeous strings and the distant sax solo, but it's instead relying on more of the melodic structure and the compositional dynamics to draw you into every odd swerve. The sheer nerve to place the creaking horns and offbeat jazz experiment of Tomboy Gold as the second song after the relatively traditional destination. And there's so many moments that splash in this territory, blending in classic pop and rock and blues chord progressions into a near seamless beast of progressive chamber music. The grand galloping strings of Wreck that ramps into big band excess on a faster tempo. The lush crescendo of an Ice Age, where it begins and ends in hushed a cappella amidst this gorgeous strings arrangement, to say nothing of the out-of-nowhere flaming lips callback, or how Oh Neglect is pure musical theater that merges perfectly with the acoustic country of Rusty Mountain, contrasted so starkly with how the bassy, post-punk inflected alternative country of the title track just before it tumbles into this ragged, distorted, chugging rage, or the unsteady balance between the graceful strings and horns and some more unstable guitars and effects lurking under Baby, I'm Not a Werewolf. I mean, that certainly feels apropos to the arc of the song, I'll give Neko Case that. Admittedly, it doesn't get away from that main Hell On critique. Given how many wild swerves that these compositions take, to say nothing of the songwriting, I would have loved the production to really let some of the electric guitars have as much firepower or explosive color and sizzle, but it also gets away from the reality that maybe a couple of these songs could have used a stronger hook to just drive them out of the park, help them stand out amidst all these opulent arrangements a little bit more. It's a minor miracle that this album does not feel bloated or drag, given how these songs will just sprawl out, where if you're not paying attention to specific progressions, they could seem like they're running together, even though I'd argue they're not, but it's also one of the main reasons why Rusty Mountain is so goddamn great. It's got that hook. But I also think there's an argument that this feels more like a musician's album that'll be most appreciated by those who adore all those little fine details details with relatively conventional production. And that also takes us straight to the lyrics, where Neko Case has described the album as being about the experience and life as a musician, past and present, both for herself and her peers, alive or passed on, following off of some of the metatext of Pitch or Honey on that last album, and continuing the structural arc of Neko Case's writing feeling more diffuse and abstracted. It's more free verse poetry that feels built to capture emotions than concrete descriptions of scenes, which feels apropos in exploring not just the tangle and intangible struggles of making art, but also experiencing her peers and friends making and performing it in the larger community, or what it even means to be perceived as an artist when the work might survive past that of the artist themselves. But what sets Case's writing apart from just another metatextual riff, and which I would like regardless, is how primal yet grounded it feels, especially in a lot of the sequencing. I love how Destination sets and paints this stunning scene of a performing artist who can tap into that raw, near spiritual experience performing art on the road despite its toll on them, eluding that obvious quantification of their experience, which, as an Ice Age states, is counter to how the music industry would eat people alive, especially young women, especially on a song like Neglect highlights how they can be typecast or run ragged, something that Neko Case would know all too well, but is kind of trying to embrace the positives as she reaches her 50s and middle age, long past what the industry would consider. But thus she meets that era with this primal rage and vigor across the title track that reaches the sharpest dichotomy on Baby I'm Not a Werewolf, full of ravages that feel across the landscape like a force of nature, an intensely physical experience that parallels that nocturnal, artistic, animalistic strain. But I also love the cacophony when you hear a cut like Tomboy Gold that shows such a personality split is most often reserved for men, or those who are men-coded, and the murky confusion as the feel of reverting back to old bruising sports references to be strong enough to fight one's way through the stage. And yet, it's not all just careening impact. Wreck is this plea for reckless tenderness. The companionship of Louise is a wonderful escape and a very deliberate Thelma and Louise homage, also apropos. And my absolute favorite run of songs, unsurprisingly coming from me, are when she delves into that process. From where she gently corrects the audience on Winchester Mansion of Sound, breaking the fourth wall that's not so much romance as it is a primal ecstasy in experiencing art, to an Ice Age exploring writer's block, a mental argument with her muse, which I thought was a nice companion piece to when fellow new pornographer Dan Behar explored similar territory on Poison Season a decade ago, only for Rusty Mountain to be an explicit rebuke and condemnation of how male artists utilize real women as their muses to make art, while denying them their voice and their agency in their story and history. At this point of her career, Neko Case is way more interested in wild and messy inclusion, a communal embrace of wonder, inexplicable power. To quote Little Gears, where she marvels and feels almost cheated at how easy a spider can spin its web, a little fragile miracle, she imagines an IOU from its destruction with the words, "Please stay here on Earth with me, and I'll try not to explain everything away." And the closer, Match Lit, leans further into that description of the magic, the trick, the spell being woven. And maybe it's that enchantment that it can soothe the pain of those conjured magic and then who had to pass away, or at least acknowledge the grief one feels and acknowledging what they were and what mattered along the way. And like with Hell On, I could continue exploring every striking yet deceptively simple turn of phrase where Neko Case has always excelled, but truthfully, the verdant density and wonder of this album resist easy analysis in its bounty, the sort of project seemingly rooted in the familiar until it upends it at every turn. The previous album almost now feels transitional in laying the foundation of these prog-adjacent neoclassical landscapes that contrast so powerfully with the poetry that splits the high-minded with the simple and true. And besides, if I were explaining everything, well, I feel I would be missing the point. Now, wouldn't I? In short, while I might give Hell On the slightest edge on the best songs and hooks, Neon Grey Midnight Green is pure wonderful. An easy contender for among the best of 2025, even if it might be a tricky album to fully untangle in both lyrics and composition. Not the easiest recommendation, especially if you weren't quite on board with the shaggier sides of Hell On that are only now more pronounced, but I'd absolutely argue it is worth the challenge. Once again, flying under the radar, folks, please check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. Yeah, I had to sit with this one for a while, unsurprisingly. Neko Case does not make easy albums, and while I'd say the production is a little bit more accessible, the way these compositions go in so many different directions, and given her style of writing, I feel like I really wanted to give this proper time, and man, I'm glad I did. This is really something special. Leave your comments down there below, but beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If y'all want to get involved in helping support the channel, get albums on my schedule, or just argue with me on my Discord, link to my Patreon and YouTube memberships right over there. Don't feel obligated. Tough times out there. I understand. Recession's probably coming. But again, the option's available. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.